do with them rather than what we can do with technology is what I want to talk about tonight. And the first question that I want to ask the panel in this case is that if you think about your technology, the technology that you have developed, how does it impact the world in the most positive way? Yeah, I mean, and does it try to, as it says there, it tries to maximize the interest of everybody while promoting well-being and reducing suffering? So is there behind your development of technology, is there the intent and maybe also the practical outcome of a positive impact for the world around you? I like to start this on a positive note and ask and hear from you a bit more. Have you used that in your development? And if not, is it something though that you're concerned about? So maybe Nick, can you go first?
So with Joey Craig, what we're trying to do is democratize finance, essentially. And when we started, one of the big issues that we was confronted by was banks and how they deal with your money. So a few things that people don't commonly know about banks is that when you deposit your money to the bank, they have the legal ownership of it, and so that leads to them being able to do whatever they want with it. So they can spend it on things that you totally don't believe in, like cigarette companies or other such things that are totally against your values. And also what they can do is create money. So 97% of the money that's in our economy has actually been created by a bank. So not only are they able to kind of control where it's spent, but they can create it. And then, with that power, they can control governments and policies and all sorts of things. So what this all led to was basically a global financial crisis, because all they wanted to invest in was property, and that didn't really work out. And so what came out of that was, well, we need to bring the power back to the people to decide where the funding goes. And so crowdfunding came about so that we can all basically together become investors. And equity crowdfunding came out so we can all buy shares in companies. And we can basically be the VCs, we can be the banks. So what we truly believe in, funding should be representing the values of society. And so the way to do that is to essentially give the power to the people. So things like, that's really one of the reasons I'm so passionate about alternative finance is because peer-to-peer lending, for example, you lend directly to the borrower. And so instead of putting in the money into a bank that's just been bailed out, you can essentially get 8 to 16% interest on lending direct. And so you totally skip the middleman and totally skip being able them supporting things that you don't believe in.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we're called Inclusive Ventures, so we're about social inclusion. So in some ways, the answer is straightforward: education benefits everyone. But actually, that's not the case. When I look at the investment in education technology globally, it's almost exclusively for first world countries. And when we look at a platform like Moodle, it's a little unusual because Moodle's open source and it's proliferated truly globally. Because it's open source, it's free. So there's a lot of countries where the only learning platform they use is Moodle. They've never heard of Blackboard or Canvas or Desire to Learn or any of the other ones. So what's happening here is that market forces create pull for companies to go into countries that have got money. So if we ask this question from a global perspective, I think learning technologies can positively impact the world by one way or another becoming more available globally, and B, the challenge that we're working with is having development that's not just funded for Western first world contexts, but for a bunch of other contexts. I might have answered a different question. Look, in short, e-learning, I mean, who hasn't used an online learning management system? That's probably the question. I mean, it provides flexible delivery access for people who are separated by distance or time from their learning institution. So e-learning is awesome in that regard. I'll hold fire until you ask me some of the flip side questions.
Yes, that comes next. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. So my story is a little bit different, and hopefully a little bit, it can add a different perspective. As you know, KIC is a mission-based on a mission to end youth unemployment, and we do that through entrepreneurial doing, and then we invest in ideas and we provide job outcomes that way through job creation. So our latest venture, KIC and the Chocolate Factory, was actually developed through engaging, and look, I threw a little task up to the kids. 20 kids that I was teaching, we'd already opened a number of coffee stores, and we went, right, we've got to do something different. And for some reason, we focused on a chocolate mould that was made from a vacuum-formed thing. And over a year, the most disadvantaged kids in the community learnt about engineering, CAD designing all on their own. They did not do it. We self-taught, we watched a lot of YouTube, we engaged with Fiverr and the community in the Philippines and people that taught us how to build things very cheaply, you know, through those systems. We then learned how to print on 3D printers, then worked out that that wasn't stable enough, so we advanced up to PolyJet $500,000 printers. We learned how to vacuum form. We learned then how to create our own silicon manufacturing. And when the traditional way of creating chocolate is through silicon injection molding, we worked out really quickly that we could actually customize any brand design within 24 hours through our system. And then we thought, well, we'll push that a bit further and we'll be able to create anyone's whimsical Willy Wonka chocolate bar in 8 minutes. So then we evolved and we taught the most disadvantaged kids how to understand food technology, because you can't blast chill chocolate that's been tempered and actually create a good product. But over the 12 months of learning, we worked out how to do it. We learned the conditions, the environment, and so all of those things enabled us to then go, well, why don't we create the newest Wendy's chain? For a number of reasons that things evolved, but for us it was about enabling learning, because we've now got other kids inspired to understand more concepts around engineering, understanding digital. So for me to positively impact the world and then advances to all the other higher, deeper learning around deep learning or AI, is that we need to be broadening our inclusivity. And my passion and mission is always around, well, if we leave the most privileged people to solve the problems of the most disadvantaged people, and a lot of people feel that they aren't really doing that, but they technically are. If you're sitting in a room making decisions about the most disadvantaged, not getting them to live the whole process, you're not technically changing anything. So we've now used that model KIC, and we will hopefully scale to how do we then transition that. And I think for us as a brand, the thing it did was put technology, actually something that we could touch, and realise that we could create a company that now could scale on just advancing our knowledge. And at the same time, we created many jobs from that, so that was cool. So a little bit different.
Yes, no, great. Awesome. So Josh.
Cool, is that me?
Yes.
Yeah, cool, thanks. So just tell quickly what Humanitix does in case you don't know. We're the world's first not-for-profit ticketing platform, and we're trying to solve two things. One is we're trying to redirect the billions of dollars in annoying booking fees, the things that we most care about, which is education for disadvantaged kids. So that's parts of Asia through our partner Room to Read. It's also here domestically, the organisations like Gallery, which do a lot of great work in Indigenous education. The other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to improve accessibility of live events. The number one issue in Australia reported by people with disabilities is social inclusion and community participation. But at the heart of that lies events. When we sit down with people with disabilities and talk to them about it, it's generally a breakdown in confidence of whether they'll attend the event and have a smooth experience. And that actually starts information, and that's why a ticketing platform is important there. And so to the question about how do we think of design and technology and building software, so we've partnered with Vision Australia and the Australian Network of Disability. And according to Vision Australia, we're the first ticketing platform in the market that's web accessible in the front end. So people with vision impairments, can actually navigate the ticketing page. We're doing more with them. We've just released a search feature in our events catalog where you can rank by things like Auslan interpreters, so you can see which events will cater to your needs. We're going next level, so we won the Google Impact Challenge last year, and a lot of the funding they've given us is we're going to be working with cognitive technologies. So to talk to an example of where that's applicable, say you're legally blind and you rely on your iPhone a lot, most likely. And when you go to a ticketing page like Eventbrite or Humanitix, you'll click text to voice reader on your mobile and it'll read to you what's on the ticketing page. The problem is most websites aren't built with that in mind. So if you're trying to find out the date, the ticket price, the venue, and who's speaking, you're going to listen for about 1 or 2 hours, hoping you get the information you need. So we're working on how we get the information they need succinctly into that text-to-voice reader, and also syncing that into their calendar the morning of the event. Because what do we all do the morning of an event? We check our diary to see where we're going at what time. Again, that whole process can take 2 hours for someone who's blind to try and find out that detail if they don't have their carer or family member with them. So how can we get that process down to 3 minutes? And so that's how we think of technology and how we design our platform. But at the core of our philosophy and why we do ticketing in the first place is me and Adam, we both have this view that technology is the biggest driver of change in the world. It's not inherently good or bad, but charities and the not-for-profit sector, which we burden with probably the hardest things in society, really have their hands tied behind their backs because they don't have much bandwidth to innovate. If you're a charity and you spend $2 million on a software project that fails, your donors are really upset for good reason. But that's really tough because in the investment community, the for-profit community, it's the complete opposite. VC investors in San Francisco, they're expecting 1 in 100 to go to $1 billion and the other 99 to fail. And that culture is very different. Most boards of big charities are 50, 60 plus and have nothing to do with technology their whole career. So they're not in the position to back technology projects internally. And there's not many foundations that are set up to grant technology ideas. So we've created Humanitix, which is a tech charity. And our view was at the very start, for this to be successful, for us to give ourselves the breathing space to blow money on some development, because that's inevitable if you're in the game of technology. We have to have a really powerful economic engine at the center of it. And so that's why we're going after the ticketing industry, because it's one of the biggest industries. It's incredibly resented. So I'm sure we've all had the experience of buying a ticket to a show, getting slapped with some $10 booking fee for something now print at home. And those prices haven't come down over time. The other thing is the technology costs always come down over time. So we've seen the profit margins of the ticketing industry expand considerably over the last 2 decades. And it's also been a structural growth trend in the industry. So from an investment perspective, it's a very attractive market. We're trying to yield that to drive social impact, largely through our education projects, but also through improving accessibility at live events, which is right now not a great situation if you're disabled or blind or whatever it might be.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Josh. That's great. Very interesting to hear how you're building, especially how you're building your website for the visually impaired people. And do you have any other website that is really well done in that respect? Do you know any, so we can have a look? And
not off the top of my head. I have to get our head of design, Anna. Yeah. So we've done like probably a dozen or so rounds of audits with Vision Australia. Yeah. They have an internal team that actually do this professionally. And so they've been coming back, we've been changing colours, fonts, layouts, etc. I'm personally not doing the work internally. No. So I haven't been, I'm not the best person to answer that. That's I can come back to you on that.
That's all right, no worries.
If you send me an email afterwards.
We'll stay with you for the next question. You said to yourself already that technology, good or bad, that's not the question, it's happening. And the change and also social changes are driven by technology nowadays. So we just heard, how you're trying to use technology to do good. And now the next question is, the second question is about, well, while doing that, there could be also consequences while you try to do good at the same time, there are unforeseen sometimes consequences of things happening that are maybe not working out so well. And so my question to you is that what are you doing about that? Are you sacrificing certain values or rules that you stick to because of business models or because of certain technological restraints that you may have? Is there anything there that have you thought about it in your company?
Yeah, we've thought a lot about that, and we're pretty lucky, but it's lucky by design. So if we were a social enterprise selling ethical shirts that weren't made in sweatshops, then if we want to not make clothes in sweatshops, guess what? Our shirts cost more because we're not paying child rates, which is a good thing. Yeah. So that means our product has two types of customers: super ethical customers or super rich customers. And both of those are niches, so we'd never scale and be a mass market product. We'd stay a cool social enterprise that makes impact, but at a local level, we'd never be able to change like massive social impact.
No.
We're a software as a service platform. And that's great for a couple of reasons. One is our supply chain is pretty straightforward. We don't have any inputs that are coming from parts of the world where we have to worry about supply chains. It's all in the cloud, built in data centers that are hosted here in Sydney or whichever market we go into. We have our software developers internal. So it's pretty hard for us to imagine where our supply chain will go wrong or how our product will be used incorrectly. Because we're not creating a new market, so the ticketing market already exists, we're just disrupting it. But I can't see how we'd revolutionize it in a way that would backfire. We're literally redistributing the profit pool and helping more people with disabilities enjoy and experience community and not get isolated. There probably will be something that we haven't thought of, I'm sure, but I think that's more going to be inherent to the events industry and not something that's driven by our model. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Josh. Go to Louise. Yes, the other way around.
For me, even just going back into that, what I think about straight away is that, because we also built our own app, The Kick in the Chocolate Factory, so we actually excluded so many young people in the doing, because one thing I learned is not a lot of people like or are well suited to that engineering or the programming or the coding, and I definitely didn't have the skills to enable bringing everyone on board. So when you've got a mass of young people you're working with, and obviously being a chocolate factory, great, so other people can go and learn how to temper chocolate and stuff like that. But it became quite apparent for me that unless we changed the way in which we engaged peer-to-peer or engagement in that type of learning, I didn't have the skills, but I was only ever getting the 1 or 2% in the class that was actually really, really well skilled for the type of stuff that we were doing. So it was becoming more and more apparent to me is that how do we make it more inclusive? The jobs of the future is all digital. How do we build systems so we actually not have the gap doesn't become wider? And just even in the example of where we were just using, so we spent the whole year when you're doing something like, it costs tens and thousands of dollars for Hagues just to create a new mould. We were creating it in 24 hours. It's actually, unless you actually see the process, it's pretty remarkable. But what happened is I was spending late nights with 1 or 2 kids doing it, 24 hours, not the whole class and not my whole workforce. So for me, very quickly, I learned, hang on a minute, what are we going to do about how are we going to capture more and more people, and how are we going to learn new ways of educating that then allows more people to understand, and whether that's through gamification or, that's what became more apparent to me.
Yeah, thank you.
So Save the Children have a principle that I've learned through much suffering, do no harm. So I'll give you an example of a debate that we had a few months ago. We kind of bounced in and said, great news, we think we can secure a big pot of funding to run a program in this province, and we want to use this curriculum content which we found, which we think is awesome. So they started asking some questions. Where's it from? America. Does it have American voices? Yeah. Does it have American spelling? Yeah, it does. Does it use metaphors like shopping malls and zoos and hamburgers? Yeah. Why would you select such a hideous solution? These people speak Pidgin. In fact, before they speak Pidgin, they speak their local tongue, and then they learn Pidgin, and then they're learning English as a third language. And now you want to throw American culture at these kids that have got nothing, and their parents have got nothing and no jobs, and they're going to look at this software. Why would you do this? Well, because this is the biggest venture-backed e-learning curriculum company in the world that works in the primary school space, and they're running a program in the US called Bring Learning Home, which is a social, venture, and they're wanting to scale it out, and they're willing to support us, and they're willing to localize their products, and the telco's got some requirements, around licensing and the reliability of the software and the product, etc., that a company like this is going to meet, and frankly other little sort of social ventures are not. So we have this debate, this ethical debate, are we about to do harm? And for me, sort of naive tech perspective, it's easy. Like, you can have nothing or you can have this.
Yes.
Because I can't get you.
You would have been good at the road. So we were playing a game before of when you would.
Utilitarian, yeah.
That's right.
Yes, utilitarian.
We'll show you.
Yes.
We think we can get funding for this one,
Just the best means.
but we can't get funding for the others. So what are we going to do here? So that was really difficult, but creative, because we came to a compromise, which was okay. This can work as long as you can get them to upload 100 PNG produced e-readers with voice and graphics, and get them to promise to localize at least 10 books, and let us choose which of the thousands of books we want to have, and which are the ones we want to exclude because they're inappropriate. Get them to agree to slow down the pace of the reading in the e-readers, by 75% because it's too fast. And so we worked through a bunch of issues like that and came to a compromise. But personally, I find that a really confronting and difficult discussion to have, because the commercial construct there was that I could get sponsorship and funding and support because these guys are big and because they're American, and I couldn't get it any other way. And I was kind of taken aback, because the first reaction was, no, this is going to do more harm than good, which was a shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's good to know people have that kind of moral compass and morals to account.
Well, this is a pretty difficult question.
Your case, yes.
In our case, because democracy doesn't always work. And leaving the choice to people to fund things.
Who's thinking about Donald Trump right now?
Yeah.
Brexit.
There are a few examples. And so as a platform, we have
What's
to...
our Prime Minister about? Does everybody know?
As a platform, we kind of have to do the front-end screening and decide, high level what will go on the platform, given to the people, because if someone can pitch something perfectly, then they can make anything sound incredible. So we have to do a lot of that screening. So I can see that in the future being quite a difficult choice. And so thinking about these things, we've come up with a few different ways of dealing with it, and through trying to solve other problems on our platform and in the community, we've essentially become a funding network of networks. And so we connect with universities, with people in agriculture, and create these pockets of tribes. And the internet is full of these tribes and communities of people who are experts in their own domain. And so we can kind of crowdsource, in a way, a screening mechanism. And also these people are the ones that will end up pushing your ideas to their networks. So if you're in space, for example, and you come onto the platform, we will connect you with an accelerator or something in space, or investors in space that have a community, and they can sort of see if they want to put it on their part of the platform. this is what I mean by decentralizing our platform. So we're not the only ones playing God and making the decisions, that we can kind of leave that to experts in different ways. And slowly and slowly we can create more of these experts, and we can organically kind of grow how we change the flow of funding. So it's not like the banks where they're just sort of, you don't know where it's going to go and so on. So yeah.
Yes, you don't want to become a bank, right?
No,
that's
no way.
no. So that's an ethical journey that you go through, I guess. And how to set it up well, that may not even be very clear to everybody yet in the equity funding world, which is still very new as well. So we don't know very well how that's going to play out.
To actually fund cooperatives and cooperative capital units or something along those, like different types of financial instruments that are quite new into Australia. So yeah, I'll let you have a go on that.
Yes.
Sure. So, like Bert mentioned, Joey Crowd has been around for a little while, and it started basically out of university with me and my co-founder, and back then everyone was like, equity crowdfunding will never be a thing. You're wasting your time. We went to 600 investors, got the door shut on us until we met someone from Texas who gave us 5 minutes and some cash. But we started with rewards crowdfunding initially, waiting for equity crowdfunding to be legal. We built a platform. Then we learnt about how social media interacts with funding, and how we can use that as a force for good to help spread awareness so more people can get funded. And so what we've done now, since equity crowdfunding has recently become legal, we've come back in and basically brainstormed on how we can launch a new platform that decentralizes a little bit, like I mentioned. So we're launching that actually this year. So as far as companies that we've funded on the platform, we've done a little bit in rewards, but none in equity at the moment, as we're yet to launch the new project. But we are restricted by regulation for a little bit at the moment on what we can actually fund. So cooperatives, it's pretty much just sort of PTY LTDs that we can fund at the moment, just the typical ordinary shares. But I'm hoping very shortly that we can add convertible notes and like other different company structures as well to what we can fund. Did that answer the question in a roundabout way?
Yeah, it doesn't sound as though you can fund cooperative capital units at this stage.
Not at this stage, no. But what we can do is and what we want to do is work with cooperatives to help fund companies that can benefit them as well. So there might be spin-off technologies that can help the cooperative in some way, that can come on the platform, and then the cooperative can use its network to spread awareness about it and bring some funding in. So there are ways that we can work.
So can you fund bonds? Or no?
Not at the moment. There are different regulations in the lending space, and we are definitely looking into launching down the track for more of a lending style platform, but at the moment, no, it's just equity for us.
Any other questions for anybody? I think you're interested.
For Steve, is Inclusiv kind of exclusively interested in PNG, or are you kind of perfecting the model that you're rolling out there to take it to other communities that could benefit from it, or will you kind of do as much good as you can in PNG first?
You're reading our minds. So the problems in PNG are acute, and when we started the Moodle services business years ago, and people asked us where we're from, we said Adelaide. like, wow, that's a really tough place to start a business.
Not true anymore.
But the flip side was, like, if you can make a national business work out of Adelaide, it's a good business, right? Oh, this is not going to end well, is it? I really wish I didn't start down this path. Similarly, so PNG is a really challenging circumstance. We would like to think that we can, through our partnership with Save the Children, collect enough evidence that at least one or two of the approaches that we try are effective, and then scale them up. So you can imagine me having spent so much time with the Moodle community globally, and I've since leaving the corporate gig that I had, I went back and consulted to the Moodle global board. So you can imagine sort of what's ticking over in my mind about where we might go from PNG, and I kind of hinted at that earlier, that there's a lot of money going into EdTech in first world countries. And not a lot of really scalable, successful, learning approaches in developing countries. So, so your question is super insightful, and hopefully in 2 years, we're talking about the work that we're doing in a dozen countries, and PNG was where we tested the model. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Anybody else?
Just a question for Nick. Being in finance is interesting overall, the landscape of things actually. But being ethical when it comes to finance, how do you manage to kind of stay sustainable for yourself as a company without actually providing ethical funding? So how do you manage to pay yourself basically?
Yeah. Well, I'm of the school of thought that being ethical and being profitable can be done, and I actually think that it's a lot more sustainable as well. And so if we're building a product that diverts where the power is from the institutions to the people, I think that's doing a good thing. That's a force for good. But yes, we do have to pay ourselves as well, and so we do have revenue streams coming in. But as long as we're giving more value to the people and we're solving a real problem, that we can see more entrepreneurs like the ones in this room actually getting funded and growing. And it's the most heartbreaking thing to see an amazing founder and visionary not being able to launch their product because they just don't have the funding, because no one heard them out, or they didn't have the network, or they didn't have the uncle with the yacht club or whatever, right? So that's kind of where we want to solve the problem. But yes, we do have to.
So that's why the screening you were talking about is like screening the network as well for them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what when we looked at crowdfunding, democratizing finance, it was really people were like, you get put on the platform and then what? You have to do all your own marketing, and you have to find your own networks, and finding rich people that have the money spare, that's really difficult, especially in Australia when we have 1/10 of the amount of funding per capita versus the US, even with population involved. So it's 10 times harder. So that's why we thought we have to solve that problem of connectivity, and also inspire and get communities to actually be actively involved. So they get we split our revenue with them, so they can actually benefit from spreading awareness. So it's not just charity, because that part of it for equity and a financial instrument, I'm not sure is a scalable, sustainable way.
Anybody else?
Can I ask, so the crowdfunding that you do, they're loans? No. So the people who go onto the platform, so the funders, they take an equity position in the business,
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah. So you
and
can
is there
have,
an exit strategy for them out of the business? Like, is there a time, like, they get spat out at 10 years or something?
Yeah.
I don't know, what's the deal with that?
yeah, so to get onto the platform, you have to have obviously a liquidity event that you're planning. Obviously, you can't predict the future with these types of businesses. It is the earlier stage, high risk, high return. But we promote people to diversify their investments, and it's easy to do that with equity crowdfunding because you can get equity in a company for $50. So you can diversify through heaps of different companies and overall get a good return from the ones that do well.
Yeah, awesome. Good. All right, thank you very much for the panel. I promise we're going to have a bit of a funny ending, so I'm going to show you now. So thank you first of all, the panel. Well,